Pay or leave. I don't care which one, but you've got 5 minutes to decide before I change that lock with you still inside." The words landed in the hallway like something dropped from a height. Denise Whitfield stood in the doorway of apartment 4C, her daughter Maya pressed against her left hip, the girl's small fingers curled into the fabric of her mother's coat. It was a Tuesday morning in November, the kind that smelled of cold concrete and furnace exhaust, and the hallway of the Caldwell Arms building on Mercer Street was not empty. 3 neighbors had stepped out of their units at the sound of raised voices. A man in a postal uniform stood frozen at the stairwell door. A woman in scrubs held a coffee mug with both hands and did not move. Raymond Holt, the property manager of Caldwell Arms, stood with one hand braced against the doorframe and the other holding a padlock, the brass of it catching the fluorescent light. He was a thick-shouldered man in his mid-50s who had learned early that volume was authority and had never been corrected. He said it again, louder, so the hallway could hear every syllable. 5 minutes, Denise. I've been more than patient." Denise did not raise her voice. She did not step back. She held her daughter steady and looked at Raymond Holt with eyes that gave him nothing. The neighbors watched. The man in the postal uniform looked at his shoes. The woman in scrubs turned slightly toward her door. No one spoke. Now freeze that image. Hold it exactly there. What Raymond Holt did not know, what none of those neighbors knew, what the man with the padlock could not have imagined, was who Denise Whitfield's brother was, and what he did for a living every single day. Stay with this one to the end. Every detail here is here for a reason. When the truth came out, it did not whisper. It arrived the way federal authority always arrives, deliberate, documented, and impossible to argue with. And it cost Raymond Holt something he had spent 20 years building. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you who Denise Whitfield really was, and who was already on his way. Now, here's what most people on Mercer Street did not know about Denise Whitfield. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom house in East Baltimore, the second of 4 children raised by a woman named Clara Whitfield, who worked the overnight shift at a textile distribution warehouse for 19 years without calling in sick once. Clara was not a woman given to long speeches. She had a single sentence she returned to whenever one of her children came home bruised by the world. She would set down whatever she was holding, look them in the eye, and say, "You do not let what they think of you become what you think of yourself." That was the whole of it. No elaboration, no softening, just that sentence, delivered with the certainty of someone who had tested it and found it true. Denise had carried those words the way other people carry photographs. She had graduated from Morgan State University in 2009 with a degree in social work. Not because it was lucrative. She had known from the first semester it was not, but because she had watched her own neighborhood absorb blow after blow, and she wanted to be one of the people who showed up afterward. She spent 4 years as a case manager for Baltimore City's Department of Social Services, then moved to a nonprofit housing advocacy organization called Anchor House, where she eventually became a senior housing counselor. She knew tenant law the way a carpenter knows the grain of wood. Not from a manual, but from years of running her hands along its edges, finding where it held and where it split. She had moved to Columbus, Ohio 3 years earlier, following a job offer from a regional housing coalition. She rented apartment 4C at the Caldwell Arms because it was close to Maya's school, because the rent was manageable on a nonprofit salary, and because the building looked solid from the outside. She had signed a 12-month lease. She had paid every month on time. She had a paper trail the way her mother had taught her to maintain one. Methodical, complete, kept in a green accordion folder on the second shelf of her kitchen cabinet. She also had a brother named Marcus. Marcus Whitfield was 38 years old, 2 years younger than Denise, and he had been a United States Marshal for 11 years. He was assigned to the Southern District of Ohio, based out of the federal courthouse on Marconi Boulevard in Columbus, and he drove a government-issued Ford F-250 with federal plates. He wore a badge and a service weapon and a quiet authority that had nothing to do with volume. He had learned, the way all the Whitfield children had learned, that the loudest person in a room was rarely the most powerful one. He had been in a training session in Cincinnati when Denise first texted him that morning. He had read the message at a stoplight on I-71, heading back north. He had not responded immediately. He had simply turned the truck toward Mercer Street. He was about 40 minutes out. Now, let me tell you about Raymond Holt and the world he believed he owned. Raymond Holt had managed the Caldwell Arms for 11 years, and in that time he had developed a philosophy of property management he would have described as firm and efficient, and that anyone who had rented from him would have described as something else entirely. He owned a partial stake in the building through a limited liability arrangement with a larger property group called Meridian Residential Holdings, a Columbus-based outfit that owned 14 buildings across the city. The arrangement gave Raymond day-to-day operational authority, which he exercised with the confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for how he exercised it. He had a system. It was not written down anywhere, but it was consistent. Tenants he considered reliable, meaning tenants who did not ask questions, did not request repairs in writing, and did not know their rights, received a certain latitude. Tenants who pushed back received a different kind of attention. Raymond Holt had learned over 11 years that most people, when faced with a padlock and a raised voice, would simply leave. It was cheaper than a lawsuit. It was faster than an eviction proceeding. And it almost always worked. He had tried it on 6 tenants in the past 3 years. 4 had left within a week. 1 had called a legal aid hotline and moved anyway when the process dragged on. 1 had filed a complaint with the city housing office that Raymond had managed to stall for 7 months before it was quietly closed. He had looked at Denise Whitfield and made a calculation. Single mother, nonprofit salary, probably stretched thin, probably didn't know the procedure, probably wouldn't fight. He had been wrong about every single one of those assumptions. What Raymond did not know was that Denise had been counseling tenants through exactly this kind of illegal lockout for 6 years. She knew that under Ohio law, a landlord could not change locks or remove a tenant's belongings without a court order, regardless of any claimed lease violation. She knew that what Raymond was doing in that hallway was not a gray area. It was a crime. She knew the statute number. She knew the remedy, and she had already photographed the padlock in his hand before he had finished his second sentence. She had also already called Marcus. Dramatic irony is a quiet thing. It does not announce itself. It simply waits. Raymond Holt stood in that hallway with his padlock and his certainty, surrounded by neighbors who had gone still and silent, and he had no idea that the thing he was most afraid of, consequence, was already in a federal truck on Interstate 71, doing 70 miles an hour. The temperature in the hallway had not changed. It still smelled of old carpet and the ghost of someone's breakfast. But something had shifted in the quality of the silence, the way silence shifts when people sense that a situation is moving towards something they cannot make themselves leave. Raymond Holt checked his watch slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he wants the gesture to be read as power. 4 minutes, he said. Denise looked at him. I have a valid lease, Mr. Holt. You do not have a court order. What you are doing right now is an illegal lockout under Ohio Revised Code 5321.15. I want you to understand that clearly. She said it the way her mother had taught her to say difficult things, without heat, without trembling, without giving him the satisfaction of her distress. 11 words of statute, 1 sentence, calm as a deed of title. Raymond Holt's jaw tightened. He had heard people cite statutes before. Usually it meant they had spent 20 minutes on Google and were bluffing. He looked at Denise Whitfield, her coat, her daughter, the green accordion folder tucked under her left arm, and he decided she was bluffing. I don't need a court order for a lease violation, he said. Read your lease. I have, she said. Have you read the statute? The man in the postal uniform had not moved. The woman in scrubs had set her coffee mug down on the floor beside her door. A third neighbor, a young man named Deshaun Garrett, who worked maintenance for a property company 2 blocks over, had come out of apartment 4A and was standing very still in his doorway, watching. Deshaun Garrett knew enough about property law to know that what he was seeing was wrong. He was 24 years old and had been a tenant at the Caldwell Arms for 8 months. He had seen Raymond Holt do this once before, to a woman on the 2nd floor who had left crying with 2 garbage bags. He had said nothing that time. He had told himself it was not his business. He was not going to say nothing this time. She's right, Deshaun said. His voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man who knew he was taking a risk. You can't lock her out without a court order. That's the law. Raymond Holt turned and looked at Deshaun Garrett with the particular expression of a man who has never been contradicted in a hallway he considers his. You want to mind your own business, Raymond said, unless you want me looking at your lease next. Deshaun Garrett did not go back inside. He stayed in his doorway. His hands were visible, his shoulders were level, and he did not look away. It was a small act. It was not nothing. Maya pressed closer to her mother's side. Denise put her hand on the back of her daughter's head, steady and warm, and she did not move from the doorway. Raymond Holt raised the padlock. Time's up, he said, and then they heard it. The sound came from the stairwell, not hurried, not theatrical, just the deliberate weight of boots on concrete stairs, the kind of footfall that has somewhere specific to be and knows exactly how to get there. The stairwell door opened. Marcus Whitfield stepped into the hallway. He was in his work clothes, dark, tactical pants, a government-issued jacket with the word Marshal across the back in the gold letters, his badge clipped to his chest. He was not running. He was not shouting. He walked the length of the hallway at an even pace, and the quality of the silence changed again, this time completely. He stopped beside his sister. He looked at Raymond Holt. He looked at the padlock. He looked at the folder under Denise's arm and the child at her hip, and then he looked back at Raymond Holt with an expression that was not anger and was not threat. It was simply recognition. The recognition of a man who has spent 11 years in federal law enforcement looking at people who have just made a very serious mistake. He said 4 words. That's my sister's apartment. Raymond Holt's hand, the one holding the padlock, dropped approximately 3 inches. It was involuntary. His eyes moved from the badge to the jacket to the truck visible through the hallway window. the white F-250 with federal government plates parked directly in front of the building's entrance. He had not heard it pull up. He had not been listening for it. He had been too busy counting down minutes. Marcus did not reach for his radio. He did not make a show of his authority. He simply stood where he was beside his sister and waited. The hallway was completely still. The man in the postal uniform had not moved. Deshaun Garrett was still in his doorway. The woman in scrubs had picked her coffee mug back up, both hands around it, watching. Raymond Holt looked at the badge. He looked at the jacket. He looked at Denise, who had not moved, whose daughter had not moved, who was watching him with the patience of a woman who had been waiting for this moment since the second he had raised his voice. Raymond Holt said nothing. He lowered the padlock to his side. That was the moment. Not with anger, not with revenge, just a federal badge, a sister's apartment, and a man who had run out of room to maneuver. But the hallway was only the beginning, because Deshaun Garrett had his phone out. He had been recording since Raymond Holt said, "Time's up." He had 47 seconds of clear, well-lit video. Raymond Holt's voice, the padlock, the statute citation, the threat about Deshaun's own lease. 47 seconds. He had not planned to use it. He had simply known, the way people who have been on the wrong side of power know, that documentation is the only currency that cannot be argued away. He uploaded it before Marcus Whitfield had finished his first conversation with Raymond Holt. He sent it to 3 places: a local tenant advocacy group's Facebook page, a Columbus housing news outlet called the Dispatch Housing Desk, and the Ohio Civil Rights Commission's online complaint portal. By noon, it had been viewed 11,000 times. By 3 in the afternoon, Meridian Residential Holdings had received a call from their legal department, and Raymond Holt, who had spent 11 years running a system that worked because no one ever pushed back hard enough, was about to find out what happened when someone finally did. It was about to get considerably worse. For him. Marcus Whitfield did not stay long in that hallway. He had a brief, quiet conversation with Raymond Holt. 4 sentences, maybe 5, spoken at a volume only the 2 of them could hear, and Raymond Holt had listened with the particular stillness of a man whose options were collapsing one by one. Marcus had not threatened him. He had simply named what had occurred, cited the code section his sister had already cited, and told Raymond Holt he would be making a call to the Columbus Housing Division before he left the building. Then he had walked Denise and Maya back inside apartment 4C and stood in his sister's kitchen while she made coffee she did not need, and her hands stayed perfectly, deliberately steady. Maya had gone to her room. Children sense when the adults around them need a moment to breathe without being watched. Denise set 2 mugs on the counter. She did not cry. She did not shake. What she did, after a long moment looking at the gray November light through the kitchen window, was open the green accordion folder on the table and begin organizing its contents in the order she would need them. Lease agreement on top, payment receipts behind it. The certified letter she had sent Raymond Holt 14 days earlier regarding an unaddressed heating issue. His non-response, the text messages, the photographs she had taken that morning of the padlock in his hand. She had said 11 words of statute in that hallway. She had said nothing else. She had not needed to. The Columbus Housing Division received Marcus Whitfield's call at 10:53 that morning. The inspector on duty was a woman named Veronica Sims, a 14-year veteran who had processed enough illegal lockout complaints to recognize one on contact. She pulled the address. She pulled the complaint history. She found the 7-month stalled complaint from the previous year, the one Raymond Holt had managed to slow through a combination of paperwork delays and a single phone call to someone at the city office whose name Veronica Sims had noted and remembered. She had been waiting, in the patient way that competent people in institutional roles sometimes wait, for a second complaint from the same address that she could not be pressured to stall. She had it now. She opened a new case file, marked it for expedited review, scheduled an inspection for the following morning, and flagged the property for a full compliance audit. Then she called the Ohio Civil Rights Commission to let them know that a complaint filed through their portal that morning concerned the same property and the same property manager, and that her division's records corroborated the pattern. She did all of this before noon. She did not call anyone to ask permission. That was the thing about Veronica Sims. She had been doing this job long enough to know that the moment you started asking permission to do what the law plainly required, you had already lost something you would not easily get back. By the time Deshaun Garrett's video crossed 11,000 views, the Caldwell Arms had 2 open government investigations running simultaneously. Raymond Holt did not know this yet. He was in his ground floor office, on the phone with someone at Meridian Residential Holdings, explaining himself in the careful, minimizing language of a man who has not yet understood how much trouble he is in. The person on the other end of that call was not patient with him. Meridian Residential Holdings had 14 buildings in Columbus. They had a legal team, a public relations consultant, and a board of directors that had spent considerable effort cultivating a reputation as a responsible, community-minded property group. They also had a pending application before the city for a tax abatement on a new development project in the Short North neighborhood, worth considerably more than the Caldwell Arms and everything Raymond Holt had ever managed. The legal team had seen the video by 11:30. The public relations consultant by 11:45. The board had been briefed by noon. By 1 in the afternoon, Meridian's general counsel, a measured woman named Patricia Okafor, had drafted a letter placing Raymond Holt on administrative suspension pending an internal review. She had also authorized a direct outreach to Denise Whitfield, acknowledging the incident and offering to meet. Patricia Okafor had not done this out of compassion alone. She had done it because she had read the Ohio statute, reviewed the complaint history, watched 47 seconds of video, and concluded that the only path that did not end in a federal civil rights lawsuit and a forfeited tax abatement was one that began with an immediate, documented acknowledgement of wrongdoing. She was a precise woman. She understood the arithmetic of consequence. Denise received the call from Meridian's tenant relations office at 2:15 that afternoon. She listened. She took notes. She thanked the caller politely and said she would be in touch through her own counsel. Then she called a housing attorney she had worked alongside at Anchor House, a woman named Keisha Drummond, who had since moved to a civil rights practice in Cleveland and who answered on the second ring. Keisha Drummond listened to the account of the morning without interrupting. When Denise finished, there was a brief silence, the kind that precedes precision rather than hesitation. "You have the photos," Keisha said, "the video, the lease, the certified letter, the non-response?" Denise said she did. "I'll be in Columbus Thursday morning," Keisha said. "Don't sign anything. Don't respond in writing to Meridian, and don't let Maya miss any school over this." The last instruction was not legal advice. It was the counsel of a woman who understood that children absorb the weight of adult crises whether or not the adults intend them to. Denise said, "I know." She did know. She went and stood in the doorway of Maya's room, watching her daughter arrange small colored pencils in a row on her desk with the absorbed concentration of a 7-year-old who had already decided that the morning was behind her. Denise watched her for a long moment. Then she went back to the kitchen table and continued organizing her documents. This is what restraint looks like from the inside. Not the absence of feeling, the presence of purpose. Now, let me tell you about a man named Gerald Osei, because his story runs parallel to Denise Whitfield's, and the two of them had never met, and what connected them was already on the same track, heading toward the same point of collision. Gerald Osei was 44 years old. He had been born in Accra, Ghana, and had come to the United States at 19 on a student visa to study engineering at Ohio State University. He had stayed. He had built. He had done it the way his father, a man named Kofi Osei, who had spent 30 years as a secondary school mathematics teacher in Accra, had told him to do it. Kofi Osei's instruction had arrived on the morning Gerald left for the airport, delivered in the same matter-of-fact register the man used to explain geometric proofs. "You do not need them to see you," his father had said. "You need to see clearly. The rest follows." Gerald had carried that sentence the way a compass is carried, not displayed but consulted. He had earned his engineering degree in 2002, then a master's in structural engineering in 2004. He spent 6 years at a mid-sized civil engineering firm in Columbus, learning the industry from the foundation up, literally, in some cases, spending weeks on job sites in steel-toed boots, reading soil reports and watching concrete pours. He had learned the language of contractors and inspectors and city permit offices. He had learned which corners got cut and why and what it cost when they did. He had saved methodically. He had started his own firm in 2011, a structural engineering consultancy he named OC Engineering Group, working initially out of a single rented office with one drafting table and a second-hand plotter. He had taken every job he could get, billed honestly, delivered on time, and reinvested every surplus dollar back into the firm. By 2018, Osei Engineering Group had 12 employees, a reputation for precision known in every major general contractor's office in central Ohio, and a client list that included the city of Columbus itself. He did not talk about this. He did not need to. He drove a 7-year-old Volvo that needed a new rear bumper. He wore unremarkable clothes. He had a habit, when meeting new clients for the first time, of arriving early and saying very little until he had listened long enough to understand what the room actually needed. His employees called this habit the pause, and they had learned to trust it the way you learn to trust a level. It always told the truth. What most people who encountered Gerald Osei did not know, at least not initially, was that Osei Engineering Group held the structural engineering contract for a 14-building renovation project the city of Columbus had awarded the previous spring. It was the largest single infrastructure investment the city had made in its affordable housing stock in a decade. The project budget was $43 million. The project manager on the city's side was a man named Dennis Farrow, who had chosen Osei Engineering Group specifically because Gerald Osei's firm had the most thorough safety record and the cleanest permit history of any structural engineering firm that had submitted a bid. The 14 buildings in that renovation project were owned by Meridian Residential Holdings. Let that settle for a moment. Gerald Osei held the structural engineering contract for every building that Raymond Holt's parent company owned. He had held it for 7 months. He had been on job sites in 3 of those buildings already. He had a third progress report scheduled for the following week. He had never met Raymond Holt. He had never needed to. Raymond Holt was a property manager, not a principal of Meridian, and the renovation project was managed through the company's development arm. Their worlds had never intersected. Until the morning of the video, Gerald Osai had seen Deshaun Garrett's video at 12:40 that afternoon, shared through a Columbus community Facebook group he followed because it sometimes flagged permit issues in neighborhoods where his firm had active projects. He had watched it twice. He had recognized the building. He had been inside the Caldwell Arms twice in the past 4 months for preliminary structural assessments. He had recognized the address on the lease folder visible in the frame. He had not called anyone. He had not posted anything. He had simply made a note in the project file on his laptop. Caldwell Arms, Property Manager Conduct, cross-reference with Meridian Operations Contact Site Access Protocols. Then he had gone back to the structural load calculations he had been working on before the video appeared in his feed. He was a methodical man. He understood that everything documented becomes evidence. His father had taught him that a proof is only as strong as its most careful step. He did not know yet that Patricia Okafor's letter had suspended Raymond Holt that afternoon. He did not know that Veronica Sims had opened a compliance audit. He did not know that Keisha Drummond was driving to Columbus on Thursday. He did not know the specific mechanics of what was already in motion. But Gerald Osei had spent 22 years in structural engineering. He understood load-bearing systems. He understood that when enough pressure accumulates at a single point, the structure does not bend. It breaks. He closed his laptop at 5:30, drove home in his 7-year-old Volvo, and had dinner with his wife and their 2 sons. He did not mention the video. He did not mention Raymond Holt. He did not mention Meridian Residential Holdings. He had said, in total, perhaps 30 words about the matter, all of them to himself, all of them precise. The reckoning that was coming for Raymond Holt was not going to arrive through anger or spectacle. It was going to arrive the way structural failure always arrives. Quietly first, then all at once, through the accumulated weight of documented truth pressing against a foundation that had never been as solid as its owner believed. Thursday came. Keisha Drummond drove down from Cleveland in a dark green sedan and arrived at the Caldwell Arms at 9 in the morning with a briefcase and the particular economy of motion that belongs to attorneys who have stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. She was 41 years old, a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a habit of listening with her eyes closed that opposing counsel had mistaken for inattention, reliably, and always to their regret. She and Denise sat at the kitchen table with the green accordion folder open between them, and Keisha went through every document in the order Denise had arranged them. When she finished, she set her pen down and said, "This is not a difficult case." She did not mean it as a compliment to herself. She meant it as an assessment of the evidence. The evidence was complete. The evidence was damning. The evidence had been maintained, as Clara Whitfield had taught her daughter to maintain things, with the patience of someone who had always known this day might come. Keisha filed the civil complaint in Franklin County Common Pleas Court that afternoon. The complaint named Raymond Holt individually and Meridian Residential Holdings as the corporate respondent. It cited Ohio Revised Code 5321.15. It cited the documented pattern of illegal lockout attempts across 6 tenants over 3 years. It cited the retaliatory threat against Deshaun Garrett, captured on 47 seconds of video that had by then been viewed by 63,000 people. It requested injunctive relief, compensatory damages, and punitive damages. It was 22 pages long, and every page was supported by documentation that had been sitting in a green accordion folder on the second shelf of a kitchen cabinet, waiting. Patricia Okafor read the complaint the same afternoon it was filed. She read it twice. Then she called Meridian's board of directors and told them, in the measured language she used when the situation required precision over comfort, that the company had two choices. They could litigate, in which case discovery would expose the full complaint history across all 14 properties, the stalled city investigation from the prior year, and the identity of the city office contact Raymond Holt had used to slow that investigation. Or they could settle, acknowledge the pattern, and cooperate with the ongoing compliance audit. She told them the first option would cost them the tax abatement application in the short north. She told them the second option might not. She needed an answer by Monday morning. They gave her an answer by Friday afternoon. Meridian Residential Holdings settled. The terms included a payment to Denise Whitfield that was not disclosed publicly, but that was, by any measure, significant. It included a formal acknowledgement of the illegal lockout pattern and a commitment to a third-party audit of tenant relations practices across all 14 properties. It included the permanent termination of Raymond Holt's employment and the dissolution of his partial ownership staked through a buyout provision that left him with considerably less than he had expected. The City of Columbus, upon receiving the compliance audit findings, referred the matter of the stalled investigation to its Inspector General's office, which opened a separate inquiry into the conduct of the city official whose name Veronica Sims had noted and remembered. That inquiry was still ongoing when the settlement was announced. It would not close quietly. Raymond Holt was 53 years old when he was terminated. He had spent 11 years in that building. He had a system. The system had worked until the morning it met the one person it was not built to handle. A woman who had been counseling tenants through exactly this kind of situation for 6 years, who had a brother 40 minutes out on Interstate 71, and who had kept every piece of paper. He did not contest the termination. He did not have grounds to. Deshaun Garrett received a letter from Keisha Drummond's office 2 weeks after the settlement, informing him that he had been named in the complaint as a material witness, and that his documented act of speaking up had been cited as evidence of the pattern of intimidation Raymond Holt employed against tenants who challenged him. The letter also informed him that a tenant advocacy fund associated with the civil rights complaint had established a housing stability grant, and that Deshaun Garrett had been identified as the first recipient. The grant covered 6 months of rent at the Caldwell Arms, now under new property management, and included a referral to a paralegal certification program at Columbus State Community College. Deshaun had mentioned once to a neighbor that he had been thinking about going back to school. He had not mentioned it to anyone else. He did not know how the referral had found him. He suspected Denise Whitfield. He was correct. Veronica Sims completed the compliance audit of all 14 Meridian properties by the end of the year. She found code violations in 9 of them: heating failures, unaddressed structural concerns, documentation gaps that matched the pattern she had been tracking for years. She issued citations, opened remediation timelines, and submitted a formal recommendation that the inspection process for large multi-property landlords be restructured to prevent the kind of administrative stalling that had allowed the Caldwell Arms complaint to sit dormant for 7 months. The recommendation was adopted the following spring. It was not named after anyone. Veronica Sims did not need it to be. Gerald Osei completed his third progress report on the renovation project the following week, on schedule without incident. He submitted it to Dennis Farrow at the city. He did not mention Raymond Holt in the report. He did not need to. The structural work was sound. The documentation was complete. The buildings, when the renovation was finished, would be safer than they had been in 20 years. That was the proof. That was always the proof. Denise Whitfield did not move out of apartment 4C. She stayed. She had a valid lease. She had paid every month on time. She had a paper trail. She had nowhere else she needed to be. The month after the settlement, she drove back to Baltimore for Thanksgiving. She pulled into the driveway of the 2-bedroom house in East Baltimore where she had grown up, and Clara Whitfield was on the porch in her coat with a cup of tea, the way she always was on cold mornings, watching the street with the patience of a woman who had seen everything it had to offer and was not surprised by any of it. Denise sat beside her mother on the porch steps. Maya ran inside to find her grandmother's biscuits. The street was quiet. The air smelled of cold concrete and wood smoke and the particular stillness of a neighborhood that had absorbed everything and was still standing. Clara asked how things were. Denise told her, not all of it, enough. Clara listened without interrupting, and when Denise finished, Clara set her tea down on the step and said, "You did not let what they thought of you become what you thought of yourself." The same sentence, the only sentence, delivered the same way it had always been delivered, without heat, without elaboration, with the certainty of someone who had tested it for 50 years and found it true every time. Denise did not cry. She looked at the street. She nodded once. That was the whole of it. Now let me say something directly to you because this story deserves more than an ending. It deserves a question. What happened to Denise Whitfield happens every day. Not always with a federal marshal in the family. Not always with a civil rights attorney on speed dial. Not always with 47 seconds of video that finds 63,000 viewers. Most of the time it happens in hallways where no one is recording, in offices where no one speaks up, in rooms where the person with the padlock wins simply because the person without one does not yet know they have options. Most of the time the green accordion folder never gets opened. Most of the time Raymond Holt walks away. What Denise had was not luck. It was preparation. It was documentation. It was a mother's sentence carried for 30 years. It was a brother who turned a truck north without being asked twice. It was a young man named Deshaun Garrett who had stayed silent once before and decided, this time, not to. Restraint is not passivity. Dignity is not weakness. And the person standing in the doorway with nothing but a lease and a statute citation and steady hands is not always the person with the least power in that hallway. Sometimes they are the most powerful person there. The room just hasn't figured that out yet. That is what I want you to sit with. If you have ever been in a hallway like that one, as Denise, as Deshaun, as the person who looked at their shoes, drop a comment and tell me what you did or what you wish you had done. I want to hear it. Every week on this channel, we find the people the world overlooked and we tell their stories with the care they deserve. If that is something you want to be part of, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it today.